Hello, I'm Benjamin Taylor from the Public Service Transformation Academy. And because I was a victim, as we all were, of a Teams service degradation on the Monday when I delivered the session on the Adaptive Council to LearnFest, what I'm going to do for you now is a quick run through of the slides so that everybody can refer to these for future reference, and I can make sure I've gone over everything that I went over in the session. So thanks for the opportunity to be part of LearnFest, and we're excited to be involved, and the Public Service Transformation Academy has been co-delivering the Leading Greater Essex programme, along with doing some other bits of work, particularly in social care commissioning for Essex, and we've had a great experience doing it. The PSTA is a social enterprise, not-for-profit. It's a partnership made up of all the firms on the left-hand side of the slide, of firms, charities, social enterprises, all kinds of different organisations. And it delivers the Cabinet Office Commissioning Academy, which is about focusing on how to support complex systems to achieve better outcomes for citizens and communities, for real people. As well as other capability development. That's the end of the advert. But please do connect with me on social media. I'm Antlerboy. Bonus points if you can guess why I'm called Antlerboy on social media. And we're very happy to follow up with quick questions, explanations. Where does this bit fit? Didn't quite understand this. Don't agree with this. Anything like that. Do drop us a line. We'd be very happy to respond and engage. And these slides, as well as no doubt being on your Learning Hub, are available directly on the internet on this link below. This was the first of 3 workshops that very much linked together the Adaptive Council and relational leadership conditions for creating that adaptability were delivered on behalf of the Public Service Transformation Academy, and Agile Approaches Adapting at Pace delivered on behalf of the consultancy Red Quadrant. We lead the PSTA. So the last, what is it now, 22 months, and really the last 12 years have just been too much for public services. The blurb for this session sort of talked about it better than I will now, but it feels like a sequence of tsunamis rolling over us with very little really good news in sight, very little to alleviate the stress, and there is a significant amount of burnout, overwhelm, just general exhaustion. But I'm deeply impressed. I've been supporting people in public services, involved in public service transformation, change, improvement, building capability to transform for 25 years now. It's not been that easy through any of that time, to be honest. But you know, in the last 18, 22 months since lockdown, etc. I've been doing these development programs, and there's been periods when people have just been in crisis mode and just been seconded in to support crises and so on, and therefore haven't been able to engage. But there's been many more periods where we're running 6 weekly sessions where people are talking about a message, a theory, an approach, applying it to their change programs and all that kind of thing. And people have kind of turned up, and some people weren't there. A lot of people didn't manage to do the work in between. They feel a bit guilty and they look exhausted. And you think, you know, that's really tough. You know, it's really good on them for kind of sticking with this development work with all of these pressures. And then I'll come back to a session 6 weeks later, and somehow people have caught up a bit. They've applied the ideas. They've looked at the new material, and they've just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and found new wells of energy to tap. And that's very impressive. It can't go on like that indefinitely. It will go on like that for some time, I'm afraid. So we have to think about how do we deal when it's all too much. In this immediate crisis of COVID, we've learned that we can take a lot as heroes. We can do a lot of that, picking ourselves up, the adrenaline, the energy, the biscuits, chocolates, coffee, tea, whatever it is kind of really helpful to keep us going. The slow crisis, the slow drip of austerity, the damage of Brexit, the challenges that our public services are really facing in depth now, and then the oncoming impact of the climate catastrophe. Those are harder to deal with because they're over a longer time period. There's not an obvious thing to go out and attack. Even if dealing with COVID was incredibly complex, we could kind of focus on things we could do. So that's important to think about. How do we prepare ourselves for slow crises that sneak up on us? The strong message: we have to be the people we're waiting for. We can't expect anybody else to save us from this, to get us out of this challenge, and so on. We really have to find a way to help ourselves, and that means actually, as a community, as people, as citizens. And a really interesting message of the more we centralize, the more we lose. Now, you gain something from centralizing, but what I'm talking about is at the start of lockdown, there was this incredible neighborly mobilization. Streets were what we were talking about, not, communities, not place, streets. And people were making sure everybody got food, making sure kids were, taken care of, picking up medicines for their elderly neighbours and so on. And then the local community and voluntary sector were probably the first to mobilise, and maybe the umbrella bodies kind of came in, and there was a bit more structure, a bit more support, some, more movement of volunteers across streets and places and so on. But it took away a little bit of that just instant neighbourliness, that mutual aid. And then local government came in and very often said, okay, we're going to organise into 4 or 6 food delivery hubs, and we're going to organise volunteering in this way. And, by the way, even though you've been picking up the medicines for your sick and elderly neighbour for 6 weeks, you're now going to have to face a criminal records check in order to continue to do it, and so on. So we took out some of that complexity, and added some organisation and some oomph and some resources and so on. But we have to really be aware of that balance. And then the classic thing for me was there was that period, at least, and I'm not really sure how this ended up playing out, where the NHS app came on the scene. What was it in the end? 750,000 people, enormous number of people volunteered to go on the NHS app, and many of them felt they'd done their bit, sat back, waited to be called, and that centralisation, once again, at every different level as it goes up, saps the juice out of community, and simplifies and standardizes what is actually a local adaptive response. So to be adaptive, we have to be very careful not to kill off the natural ecosystems that may have some problems, may need some changes, may need some support. But it's a bit like if you go and you go into a beautiful wild meadow, and then you try and turn it into a garden. The more you turn it into a garden, the less it supports the natural ecosystem, the natural wildlife. The more you have to keep putting in energy, fertilizer, water, and so on. So, how can we keep the meadows, but help them to be more of whatever we need them to be? Hope that hasn't lost people. What can we do when everything's all too much? Well, I think we have to kind of push ourselves harder but smarter in a way. We have to double down on learning, and I'll explain a lot more about what I mean by that. We have to think more about how we can really make learning a focus even in times of crisis and pressure and burnout and exhaustion and so on. We have to play on a bigger stage. I'll explain that. And the core concept here is we have to develop adaptiveness, the ability to adapt and respond as fast as whatever the world can throw at us, and in effective ways. And very important, we have to stick to very clear ethics. And adaptiveness itself, learning better, thinking bigger, doesn't make you more ethical. So you have to take responsibility for thinking about how we are acting in an ethical way. So the message I want to get across on the learning point is there are really 3 levels of learning. One is, how can we do what we do better? How can we change the thing that we're doing at the moment? That's the easy thing. After every meeting, you can say very quickly what went well, what didn't go that well, how can we work better together, right? How can we do this better? Second level is, how can we sort of reframe, think differently about what it is we do, about our assumptions? How can we change from thinking about ourselves as a service to thinking about ourselves as something that can help people achieve their goals in their lives? That might lead to the third level of learning, which is how do we change the way we see ourselves, our identity, our job? Is it our job to create the infrastructure, or is it our job to make sure that the infrastructure is working? It goes a little bit back to that meadows versus, cut grass lawns. Meadows are very sustainable. Cut grass lawns are very unsustainable. We need to think twice before we come to a nice meadow or a fairly scruffy, ugly meadow, and we go, what we need to do here is lay turf. Well, that's not going to be sustainable. That completely changes. So, are you a turf laying landscape gardener? Or are you somebody who is helping ecosystems to thrive and be more productive, be more sustainable, and so on? I think you get the idea. Alongside that, I have this concept I say, play on a bigger stage. So the more we measure ourselves just as a service, did we tick our boxes? Did we work in compliance with our statutory regulations? Did we deal with all the demand coming into us in an appropriate way? And done and dusted, we can wash our hands of it. Doesn't matter if the actual outcomes were then crap. We did our job. The more we do that, the more we narrow down our vision. And sometimes that's practical. You have to be able to look from that perspective to make sure that the things that you're doing are good or effective. But it's a cop-out. What we really need to do is think about how are we playing the most productive role in achieving the outcomes that our citizens and communities actually need, right? So it's far better to help people to help themselves than it is to just provide. It's far better to try to create a community where everybody has a job that pays well enough and that gives them enough time that they can take care of many more of their own needs and their families and their communities' needs than it is to process benefits. Now, if people need benefits, you need damn well to process them, but can we play on that bigger stage thinking about the outcomes of the whole system? Similarly, the more we focus on people's problems, the gap, the weakness, the need, the more we put ourselves in the role of the savior, the helper, somebody above coming in to fix things. The more we focus on people's strengths, their capabilities, the things that they themselves are able to do, the more we can see ourselves as adding to, supporting that, working with them to work out what's going to make a difference. All of this is along the same lines as stop seeing ourselves as the center of the universe. Our service is the thing here, because you just have to think about the times in your lives when you are a customer of another bit of public services to understand that service is just a tiny part of your life. It might be a very painful, very necessary, a very vital, a very important part of your life, but it's got to fit in with everything else. Start seeing that we are a very small, hopefully an influential part of a very complex system. And I think you'll find very interesting ideas, possibilities, empowerment come out of that. So over the first lockdown in particular, and coming to a summary about a year ago, we had a group of 120 people who met over the period of 100 days and then occasionally thereafter to think about where we want to be in the days after the pandemic. And of course, now we're kind of really still in an ongoing pandemic. It's sort of epidemic, but it's a pandemic illness, so we're never just going to be able to just live with it. Anyway, are we getting to the days after? Maybe, maybe not, but we still need to think about what it is that we want to become. Adaptability is going to be central to that. So we very often use this distinction that comes from adaptive leadership, but this is a bit of a changed version, to understand that adaptive challenges are the important things that we need to get right over and above technical challenges, which are also important, but very often somewhat less so. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. So a technical program is programmatic linear. You know what the problem is, you know what success looks like, and you can bring in a real expert with real experience and a good understanding of have it done before many times, and you can deliver, you can create a plan, right? And your worldview, the power structures of the world that you live in, doesn't have to be threatened by that. Everybody can carry on in their roles, with their responsibilities, with their egos and everything else, right? We don't need to mix the worlds all of that much. We can all be safe in our box. In this sense, we need leaders who are experts, who can give us the right answers, who can use structural authority well. We'll probably get into some power games, and we might really want a charismatic leader who'll just give us that extra boost to kind of reach the summit. And it's really about, you know, the motivation that comes from reward and delivering the program itself, if you see what I mean. And now we need all of those skills, we need all of those capabilities still. I often give an example of this. It's like rewiring your county hall, rewiring a headquarters building, decanting, refitting. It's complicated. You've got to get all the trades, all the equipment in and out at the right time. You've got to decant, recant, set people up, train people, manage the space, plan, really, really technically difficult sometimes. But, with a big enough brain and a big enough spreadsheet, big enough Gantt chart, you can mostly get there plus or minus 10 to 15% of time and cost. Whereas adaptive challenges, and I'm mixing a lot of things here, but let's say, complex, wicked, messy social challenges, where you don't really know what the goal is. And in fact, it's disputed what the goal is. So, carbon zero, what does that really mean? It's an important thing, but how do we actually define it? How would we know really if we got to it, and so on? Leadership is likely to be contributing to the problem because of their ways of seeing the world, their ways of acting, their ways of seeing the problem, and they may benefit from the problem. They may actually get some of their authority from the fact that this problem exists, for example. What we need is a really adaptive, a systemic approach, which means we're going to fail as many times as we succeed. So we need real innovation. We need to really change our habits and assumptions, change the rules of the game. And when you change the rules of the game, you threaten the people who have done well by the existing rules of the game. It's just in the nature of the thing, right? So adaptive problems raise all these issues. That means you need true leadership. No good anymore saying, well, I delivered the program, the results are not my fault because the world changed around me. If the world changes, we have to change and adapt. So you need this true leadership. Real progress is what counts. And you need leaders to have that presence, to be fully there in the moment, really taking it all in, seeing all the perspectives, adapting to the circumstances. And that means they're going to be vulnerable because they're going to have to admit, and it's important for them to admit, that they don't know the answer. Because if you go into an adaptive problem, well, I'm an expert, I'm going to create a Gantt chart, step 1 to 1067, and we're going to follow it. That is a huge recipe for disaster. And other indicators that you're dealing with a complex, wicked, messy social challenge is if it's uncomfortable, if it's hard to, there's lots of priorities that conflict, car parking is a street parking is a lovely example of this very often. How can you resolve the issue of street parking? Well, it's an adaptive, a complex type of problem. There may be casualties. You have to blend those worlds. You have to bring real people in to work with you. You have to work across professional boundaries. You can't get from A to B except by Z, and going around in circles and exploring and understanding. Really, you need the people with the problem to do the work, to work through the issues. So very important challenge for the future is making the distinction between which parts of our problem are technical, because we do need that technical expertise, can't ever do without it, but we can't let it override the not knowingness and the adaptation, the exploration and the learning of the adaptive problems. These are wrapped up inside each other, but usually the bigger picture is the adaptive problem side of things. Hope that's clear. In that context, we created this model of the Adaptive Council, or Adaptive Public Services. And there's kind of 12 key elements to here. We picked up from our work during the pandemic a set of demands that are being placed on our organizations, and a set of challenges. Fortunately, some of these are a bit out of date. So some of the things that we thought might hit us all at once in 2021, crash out, no deal Brexit, overhaul of the planning system, huge changes to the NHS. Well, some of them are still, in the air, and some of them will still happen, but they didn't all hit us at once in 2021. Nevertheless, we're in that same knife-edge challenging situation. So the 12 things we think you need for adaptive public services are the ability to think in systems, to see systems, to deal with complexity, to understand that everything is interconnected, and that getting a fantastic result in one project that might completely derail something else somewhere else in the county is counterproductive, and we need to think through the implications of the things we're doing, because everything is connected and things are complex and will behave in unexpected ways. We need to work across those boundaries, across professional boundaries, across hierarchies, across organizational boundaries, and so on, because no single organization is capable of addressing those complex, wicked problems that we do face. And we need to balance that deep technical skill of the delivery and the expertise and analysis with real understanding of how things emerge from the circumstances in unexpected ways, and an ability to collaborate. So we need to build these three skills together. We need to be municipal entrepreneurs. We need to get in that vital money and think entrepreneurially and creatively about ways of using our assets, using our resources, and harnessing and shaping the resources of the community and all around us. We need to think about adult development. So sometimes this is called vertical development, and it's contrasted with horizontal, which is skills, building better technical skills, being a better social worker, which actually is quite complex and requires quite a lot of adult development in itself. But technical skills are different from adult development levels, in as much as adult development is about the ability to deal with complexity, the ability to not get stuck in your own box, in your own mindset, but see yourself and understand how you are responding to all the pressures and all the incentives of the space that you're in, and be able to sort of take yourself out and reframe, give yourself more options, take in more inputs, think things through more widely and their implications. So we need to help everybody to be able to do more of that. And by the way, being able to do more of that is partly dependent on, getting a decent amount of sleep, not being at your computer 16 hours a day, not having your life in tatters around you. I've picked up a puppy in the last few months. He kind of came to us as a street rescue, and we thought we'd foster him, and now it looks like he's sticking around. I haven't got kids, but just dealing with a puppy, man, it's reduced my ability to deal with complexity significantly. So these things are all relevant. We need really effective open governance. We need to be able to engage with governance decision making, allocation of scarce resources in a very open, in a very dynamic, in a way that's really focused on what is the decision here and how are we making it, and what do we need to know. Very unlike, frankly, any of the governance I've seen in any of my clients, with very few exceptions over the last 20 years. We need to be trustworthy. So not communicate in a trustworthy way, not make people think we're trustworthy, but actually be worthy of trust, behave in a way that builds trust. We need insight-led understanding. One of the really interesting things for me about the pandemic is when I was speaking to a load of people about their pandemic responses and taking in the stuff our consultants had done as well. A standout thing for me was the people who we thought were vulnerable often were not as vulnerable as that. They had good neighbors, they had family, they had resources, and they were able to look after themselves. But quite a few people who we thought were not vulnerable actually were isolated, had undisclosed problems, and the pandemic, the crisis, the lockdown brought that out, and we learned that our insight isn't as good as we thought. We need that warm data, that engagement with people's lives, that what is going on for people in order to get real insights. We need a much more flexible employment approach that takes account of the realities of people's lives, things I've just been talking about, the puppies, the babies, the kids, the teenagers, the divorces, the whatever else, all the things that happen in our lives. And we now want, I think, some people, and this is why we need flexibility, want a 9-to-5 job. They want to go to an office, they want to sit at a desk, they want that bit of security, and that's what suits them. Others want to work from anywhere in the world because they'll do the job equally well and better because they can do that, and you'll get them and you'll keep them because of that. So you need to have that flexible offer. We need to intentionally shape a culture and identity. It's no good having all the rest of this if all the time your behaviors of your leaders undermine it. The system, trying to get a bit of an expense paid, trying to get permission to go on a training course that's going to really, really help. And if the symbolism of the organization, if, the parking spaces at County Hall is all just pissing you off and making it much harder for you to really engage and work, forget about the rest. So we need leaders intentionally focusing on how are we leading, behaving, how are the systems, the processes, the procedures of the organization experienced by the people in the organization, and are those things motivating people? Are those things actually helping people to do all the rest of this, these huge demands? We need to generate that rich multi-level learning from action at those 3 levels. So are we doing the thing well? Is it the right thing in context? And are we even thinking about this whole situation? Do we know could we reconsider? Should we be rethinking what our role is? And I'll come on to this much more on the ethics point in just a minute. Are we acting as equal citizens? Are we breaking away from this divide between the saviors, the service providers, and the clients, the poor, sick, miserable people? Are we actually, in every interaction, in every plan, in every strategy, in every policy, thinking about ourselves as citizens, as people, and the clients and the partner organizations as citizens and as people first and foremost, even when we have to carry out our organizational roles? So just to finish up with the ethics part, we did a fair amount of work on what's our vision, what do we want to be valued in order to fit with this adaptive vision in the days after the pandemic. And we came up with the catchphrases, what I've just been talking about: we're all citizens. And this vision of what we value has these 5 elements. I'll come to them in more detail on the next slide. But we talked about the ethics that emerge through diverse interactions in good faith. So, if you are in good faith engaging person to person with people all across Essex, the county, Essex, the organisation, the levels, if you're actually engaging and listening to the executive leadership of the health system and the refuse collectors and the children's social care workers and somebody who's working as an informal nanny down the road from you and your neighbours and reading what people are saying on Mumsnet, and then there is going to be a clear ethical approach that can come from that. If you're actually interacting with that kind of mix of people in good faith, and so are they, and you start to build that dynamics, you get a much stronger ethical focus. So in our vision of the world, as citizens, we value all people equally, thinking about people having agency over their own lives, their own power, their own needs, their own focus, their own priorities, right? And we want people to have access to the resources and support to live their lives in a way that makes sense to them. Human to human relationships. So I've kind of belabored that point, listen to others, have others listen to me, not role to role relationships, seek other perspectives. Creative and collaborative power, thinking about people having their own sovereignty, their own self-determination, their own ability to organize, the reality that people have lots of different ways of knowing and understanding. I don't know how you've been dealing with low traffic zones, but that's a great opportunity, more than it is a huge risk for actual new ways of relating and working together if we can do it. So that means decision making needs to be transparent and needs to have people feeding in control of the decision making process as well as being told what to do by it. Economics that works for the planet and all people. So we wanted a values-based economy which understands that we're all dependent on each other. And let's not forget that message, that the people who were actually the key workers during the pandemic are the people who are the lowest paid, the hardest working, given the least status, given the least respect, not every time, but consistently and with great reliability across all of our professions. That says something, and if we can hold on to that memory, don't let it fade away, and remind ourselves of it, we'll come out of this with a different approach, a different way of thinking about economics. And we value learning, right? Ongoing, productively challenging learning that leads to mutual change. You may have heard the puppy there. He's making a little bit of noise in the background. Probably wants me to wrap up, and I probably should. So in summary, it is all too much. Got to rise to that occasion as best we can. Look after yourselves as well, for God's sake. We've got to learn more, think about playing on a bigger stage, be adaptive, and think about ethics fit for the circumstances. Change what we're doing, how we think about what we're doing, and how we think about ourselves. Move from thinking about services to thinking about outcomes, from thinking about deficits to thinking about strengths, from thinking we're the center of the world to being a part of something, and be more adaptive. And at the end of the day, remember, we're all citizens. The questions we had for LearnFest were, what does this mean for me? How can I build on my strengths? What does it mean for my team? How do we build on our strengths as a team? And what does it mean for how we as the council support and build on the strengths of our communities and citizens? Again, link to the slides is there. And we're very happy to respond to questions, queries, follow-ups, and so on about these. I'm very happy to have conversations about how we could further support you and colleagues in building this capability to be more adaptive and generally learning and changing things for the better through both Red Quadrant and the Public Service Transformation Academy. Thank you for your attention, particularly if you've just tuned in to watch this video. I'm very appreciative of that, because I am just sat here on my own talking to a screen. I hope people will follow up on this. Please do, if you use these ideas, if they're useful to you, do let me know how it goes and what the impact is, because that's enormously rewarding for us to hear. So thanks very much, and good luck with it all. Take it easy on yourselves as you go. Bye-bye.